Alright, so it seems like it took a few extra minutes to get this working and attached to the original event. Guess it's still a learning process for me here. So, good morning again, everyone. My name is Dennis Misigoi. If you somehow stumbled across this without already knowing who I am, I'm a candidate running as a Libertarian for the U.S. Senate seat here in the state of Florida. Working on giving people an alternative to the terrible options we're likely almost assured of getting from the two-party system in the upcoming 2022 election here in the state of Florida. So again, apologize for the delay and some of the technical difficulties in getting going. I want to get started talking about, first talking about the elections that just happened earlier this week in a couple other states, but I thought of some interesting observations. Something that I think is consistent with what we see in a lot of these elections and what is kind of bred out of having the two-party system that we have here, which is that particularly within the last few election cycles, definitely the last couple presidential election cycles, is that most of the times when people are winning, it's not really that those guys are winning, it's more about the other ones losing. And I think that's definitely true as it was that people were more voting against Trump than they were voting for Biden. And I think even there was a lot of people voting against Hillary than they were necessarily all voting for Trump. Although he had at least, he did have his, did and does still have a devoted following. But I think it's still a different animal where a lot of people who were voting for him were voting because they really didn't want the alternative. Because remember how many Never Trumpers there were in the GOP during their primary season up until that point. So similarly, I think the success of the GOP is less about, the success that the GOP enjoyed, particularly with the gubernatorial election in Virginia, had a little bit more to do with, again, how much a repudiation of what Democrats were doing rather than necessarily that the GOP offered so much or had done so much great. I'd even say there's a bit of an unforced error in there. I'll kind of get to that in a second. While certainly a GOP strategist might be credited for kind of pushing the whole CRT in schools narrative, I think it was sort of a really bizarre spectacle that you had, like I say, kind of an unforced error where you have this spectacle of Terry McAuliffe on a stage in a debate saying, I don't think parents should decide what their kids are going to learn in school, because parents vote, and certainly what is going to happen in their kids' school is something that impacts parents' voting decisions. Again, and maybe some of that, I don't want to say it's necessarily a blind spot for me or for libertarians in general, but I do think sometimes the issues, because it is the most egregious stuff, the stuff that is the most impactful violations on individual rights, tend to not be the most widespread. Most people aren't suffering directly the consequences of mass incarceration. Most people who are voting, certainly in the U.S., aren't suffering directly the consequences, at least I say directly, visibly, tangibly, the consequences of bad foreign policy where we're, drone bombing hospitals and weddings and stuff. So, coming back around to it though, I think this was, again, sort of an interesting thing where, again, that as an issue and again, the Democrats not really taking the easy road and just saying, look, we're fine with people being involved in their kids' education, and if there's objectionable material, hey, we'll work with people. It was a real easy issue to have handled, and really to have chosen that as the hill to die on, to say parents shouldn't make decisions about their kids' education is a really, really weird hill to die on, and so they died on that hill on Tuesday. So it's interesting, and obviously it goes without saying a repudiation of kind of Democrats and blue states in general's policy towards, with regards to COVID, the obsession with the lockdowns, mandates, the pushing of all these things that have had a real big negative impact on the quality of life for the people in those states. It is really, they should have picked up on this already by the sort of by the volume of migration of people out of blue states into red states. Here in Florida, obviously, we've been the beneficiary of it in a sense that certainly people want to be here rather than in some of those other places. I think we're set to gain at least one U.S. House seat, although that's not all since the census was before. But definitely there's been an influx of people as COVID has taken hold, and obviously Florida's state government has taken the position of going strongly against not only mandates from local governments, but also taking the position against the vaccine mandates for individuals, for under employers. A little extreme and maybe past the pale of what might be strictly libertarian. But again, if you're going to make a mistake, I would say I'd rather they err on the side of upholding the individual's right to choose rather than the business. So I think there's some lessons to be learned, and it's pretty remarkable for the Democrats that they didn't pick up on this stuff sooner. It, again, is pretty bad for them. So we're going to see if they make any adjustments between now and next year's midterm elections, and obviously going forward than that. So, but the controlling both houses of Congress and the White House may be very fleeting if they keep down this path. So we're going to see how that goes. Another thing, I guess while I'm on here to get started with, talk about an article I actually shared on here a few days back. Let me bring this thing up. Testing this out. So this is our incumbent senator over here, Marco Rubio. And I thought this was real interesting because he's talking about the need for GOP to divorce big business. I guess the whole topic of national divorce and that word being in the public discussion on politics is, maybe somebody in his staff sees on an opportunity to say, let's use this here. But I thought it was real interesting just because on first glance you might think, well, this sounds pretty good. You don't want to look like you're in bed with the big business and stuff. But actually, let me adjust something here. There we go. So, but it's not really, hey, let's get, actually divorce. I guess let's put it this way. He wants to divorce the perception of the GOP being tied to big business. He doesn't really want to divorce big business from government. I sort of laugh at a little bit of this, but because what is he actually doing? And it is interesting, I guess I'll throw in here that there is mention made in here. I don't know if this is too small for folks watching to be able to see, but one of the things it points out just early on in this article, which I got the link to, like I said, it's posted earlier on my timeline on here, is that this is set to be one of the more high-profile races here in Florida, the U.S. Senate seat, the race next year. So part of why I think it's so important for us to have a libertarian voice, an alternative to what we're going to get from the two parties. Because what are we going to get from the two parties? We're going to get people trying to say that they are the candidate and the representative of the working people. The sort of common language that we've always heard from socialists who are promising that they're going to bring the working class up, give them their just due, and all of that. This is the language that they trade in, and Marco Rubio is no exception. He is advocating for more central economic planning, has been for a number of years. Previously had rebranded this as common good capitalism, which is a term I find absolutely hilarious. Capitalism already serves the common good by creating the most efficient, maybe I even take a step back because I know a lot of people find some varying definitions of the word capitalism, but a free market system upholding individual rights to life, liberty, and property, and pretty much no government interference, the freest possible economy, a price-coordinated economy, creates the best situation for economic prosperity, to improve the lives of regular people working all throughout the spectrum of who we are. So it's important for us to be able to make that case. But I did think this was interesting, just that, let's see, I mean, he talks about shifting power and this whole sort of business, but I did find it really entertaining how he even characterized this corporate patriotism. Corporate patriotism. I wonder if that's going to be a more catchy brand than corporate patriotism, rather than common good capitalism. And of course, to defeat American Marxism, I sort of joke, he makes a point in here about, where is it? You know, his issue is with woke socialism. I guess his objective is to make sure that the people in power we have are non-woke socialists, because again, that's basically what he's offering here. Institutional shareholders transmit the votes. But again, he's talking about, again, still more call for requirement company boards committed to U.S. national interests. Again, U.S. national interest is such a vague term, and again is also part of what we always hear about with the military-industrial complex, or I should say our foreign policy is all about defending U.S. interests abroad. We've seen how that's gone. Afghanistan, $2 trillion plus dollars, and the dollars is really almost the least of it. 20 years, thousands of American soldiers died on the field, tens of thousands who have died as an extension of that through the epidemic of PTSD and suicide among our armed forces. And for what? After within a week of departure, the Taliban had retaken pretty much the entire country. So nothing was achieved. The American interest, the vital American interest that we always hear about, never really seem to materialize, or at least if they are American interests, they're not the interest of average American people. They're the interests of a small sliver of American people. And so, with that said, again, it is sort of humorous the way that a lot of this is framed, but I did think that was interesting and definitely worth talking a little bit about. And he's been advocating in general a lot in the way of central economic planning as the solutions, his solutions for excuse me, still getting a hang of all this. So as his solutions for what ails America. But it's interesting because whether it's born out of fear-mongering about China as being a threat or whatever, his solutions really sort of exemplify the fact that he doesn't actually believe in free markets, doesn't actually believe in freedom. Because if you believed in that, you don't need government programs to subsidize domestic industries. You don't need to engage in protectionism and trade wars. You certainly don't go around like he has trying to tell the president to ban certain social media platforms in the U.S. He was, it's been probably a month or two at least, but was out trying to ask Biden to ban TikTok in the U.S., which, you know, in the first place is totally unconstitutional. There's no power for anything like that for the executive branch or the federal government in general. And, you know, it's just such a peculiarity, and there's other things, and so much of this policy is based on this idea that, again, a fear of China, as if China is going to overtake us, particularly now at a time when Xi Jinping is really kind of putting the screws in and trying to push them back to regress towards that more truly communist, socialist type of economy, whereas since the death of Mao and under Deng, where they had a lot of economic reforms, did open up their economy, and it has greatly prospered there for it. Instead, now they are sort of clamping down on everything, and we're going to see how that turns out. But again, if you actually believe in the free market, you have learned enough to understand why that works better. There's really nothing to fear about this, because you understand that an economy that does this is going to set itself back. We've seen it time and time again. So, taking a step back, excuse me, lost my train of thought there. Let me go ahead to take a glance at the comments. Spread the word about the campaign. Let's see, people I disagree with. Let me look at the first one I got over here. But people I disagree with might be able to communicate and grow a majority. Communication is a challenge for us. I'm not going to mince words about that. There is a disconnect and popular misconceptions, and it's easy when there's popular misconceptions. I mean, look, even here in Florida, and I thought it was really fascinating that in 2020, at the same election when Donald Trump kind of still came out clearly on top here in Florida, at the same time, a ballot measure passed to raise the minimum wage to $15. So it's incremental, but still, the fact that those two things, the same, there's at least clearly got to be some overlap if both of those got majorities in the state. So that's sort of a fascinating thing. And what I'm getting at is that the popularity of something like increasing the minimum wage exemplifies the fact that people have a certain conception about it as a simplified idea, and in general about economics, that we have yet to successfully communicate to people to get them to understand what we understand about what works and what doesn't, and the harm that these policies are doing. So it is definitely a challenge, which is why I think you need to start with those areas where we have the clearest sense, or the clearest ability to at least point out those policies that everybody objects to. Everybody, or at least not saying, no, maybe not everybody, but a clear majority. Because there are majorities of people who, again, believe in things like increase the minimum wage, more government intervention in the economy to welfare and things like that. However, even amongst those people, I think there is low-hanging fruit, like what I mentioned before, in terms of military interventionism, and particularly the military spending, which, as much as some apologists will try to gloss over this or insist that it's absolutely necessary for us to spend as much as the next 7 to 10 countries combined, it's pretty obvious to most people that it is quite a bit of overkill. And even among the socialists, the pay your fair share, let's increase taxes on the rich, even amongst those people, they will acknowledge that, well, they're not actually trying to advocate for it to spend more money on this, but let's look at the Republicans and Democrats, and in particular the ones that we're likely to have in this race. Obviously, Marco Rubio is a big fan of greater military expenditures, warmongering. He likes to beat the drum against Iran, against China, and all these other places, because he trades on conflict, and in general, like as politicians do, trade on fear. So he's always going to go. Yeah, no pun intended, sorry. That wasn't meant to be that. Overkill in more ways than one, I guess. So, but getting back to it, what they sell us on in terms of fear in these policies, again, we've got it on one side with Marco Rubio, quite obviously, quite openly, but even Val Demings, who is likely to be the quite likely front runner for the Democratic nomination, votes for the NDAA every year, voted for it again this year for the next fiscal year, and again, even after exiting Afghanistan, we're talking about still increasing further military spending. It doesn't make sense. Not to mention the other fun stuff in there, like $1 billion for Israel's Iron Dome, or expanding the draft to women. That's another fun one, which really hasn't gotten enough airtime from anyone. But again, this sort of expansion of military power, expansion of military spending, as well as the drug war, I think those things are low-hanging fruit, where even people who maybe not necessarily agree with us on all the economic stuff, we can at least make the point that, look, these guys, and in particular, these two candidates, are not going to do it. They're not going to step back. They're not going to cut this stuff. So if you want this to happen, if you want this to start happening, you've got to choose something different. And it's just a question for those people, or it's going to be for those people, how much of a priority is that? Because you're never going to get to that other point. Even what they imagine of us spending all this money on all this domestic stuff, you're never going to get there if you're still spending all this money outside, giving it away to foreign governments, etc., etc. So I think that is the challenge for us. But we've got to find those issues that I think are more low-hanging fruit. Spread the word about the campaign, man. The obvious stuff, I think, I've tried to at least, and I think we take advantage of the technology we have at the time. One thing I think versus 50 years ago when the Libertarian Party was starting was the fact that we didn't have the mechanisms for communicating. So even just as simple as me having a website right now that has a platform there that anybody can see, which goes to something else I find fascinating and hilarious, is the fact that if you go to Val Deming's site or you look at her feed on Twitter or wherever, there's almost nothing of policy. There's no policy positions on the website. It is, here's my story, donate, let's flip Florida blue, etc., etc., keep the Senate blue, push it more blue, but there's no policy positions. I guess that's an indication of where the two-party system is, and all of this. But for my part, I think the biggest thing we can do, obviously, is tell people about it, try to make people aware of it, and make people aware of the fact that you can't wait until Election Day. You can't wait until next year. You've got to become engaged. You've got to actively support this, and some of that I plan to try to reach out and do a little bit more work in terms of kind of directly reaching out to different subsets of the population here in the state, so that we can start building that awareness. But at a bare minimum, we've got the information out there that's accessible to everyone. Part of it is just driving traffic, driving people there, and I've got a few ideas in terms of how to do that. But first things first, in terms of fundraising, because we are definitely up against this kind of wall you guys are describing right now. Who needs policy positions when you're an R or a D? People just vote for a letter. It is true. People, tribalism is a big problem to overcome, and it really is a challenge for us. It's not good enough for us to be, well, look at how bad Marco Rubio is, look at how bad Val Demings is. We've really got to make a case and offer people something better. And what I hope to offer people and give them a sense of is that, almost all the problems, certainly the biggest problems that we face and that we come across, and the biggest conflicts we have internally, and just all of these issues are driven by the fact that we've got a political system that's been dominated by the same two parties for more than a century, really, that are guided by these same sort of basic principles of a government that is omnipotent and can basically legitimately do whatever it wants. Not that your freedom is above the government in anything, or that the government really has a limit in what freedoms it can limit or can take away. There's always an exception or a case where even your constitutional rights can be subverted by government. You see this with Marco Rubio and his support for red flag laws, and not just support for them, but I mean, this guy's one of the key advocates. He's sponsoring federal red flag legislation in the U.S. Senate every year for at least the last 3 years now. At least since the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting, the Parkland shooting a few years ago, he's been just like how it was passed here in the state of Florida, he's pushing to get red flag laws pushed everywhere. And again, that's incredibly subversive with the Constitution. I guess taking a step back, Val Demings' vote on the most recent NDAA actually includes a red flag law for military personnel as well. So these folks come from this standpoint of the government can do anything it wants, number one, and as a matter of principle, they believe in sacrificing individual rights for this sort of greater good. The case that we need to make, and make it clear, is that the greatest good is served by having every individual have the greatest amount of freedom. We see in different aspects of life, whether that's economic freedom or freedom in terms of your bodily autonomy, being able to decide what you put into your body, or any of these sort of things, any step that we take towards that, or where any community or nation has taken steps towards that, it has resulted in marked improvements in that area. We need to make that case. We need people to understand it is a moral issue. And I said this last time, and I will say this many, many more times. We say it even to the extent that it's cliche about choosing between the lesser of two evils, or that's what voters are always doing when they choose R or D. They're picking the lesser of two evils. And again, if you pick the lesser of two evils, you're guaranteed to get evil. And we really need to have a moral reckoning with ourselves and say, where do we want to stand on the side of these issues? Do we want to, at the end of the day, be remembered as just kind of going with the flow and helping evil to move forward, to succeed, to gain power, and to continue the slow march? Or do we want to be counted amongst those who try to do something and even succeeded in doing it? Because we can't succeed, and that's also the message. We all get caught up in how much money is spent in politics and everything that goes into that, all of the media support and this and that. But at the end of the day, it really does come down to the voter. If the voters decide it's enough, it'll be enough. If the voters decide, and it is always up to them, each one as an individual, to make the choice when they go into the ballot box to reject the two-party cartel or to continue down the same path. And we see where that's going, and we've seen where it's going. The decline of the dollar and a national debt hurtling towards 30 trillion. More terrible things than I can say, but I think that's what's key. Lowest hanging fruit as a libertarian push for in the Senate. Again, I think in the Senate or in the U.S. House, I think at the federal level, is trying to, at a bare minimum, defund all these things which there is widespread support for doing. I think in particular, people, you can find plenty of support for when you frame it also as a fiscal responsibility issue. Reducing the military budget, there's going to be support for it. I think for getting on some constitutional things, how come they never want to tax the churches? Well, I never want to tax anyone. As we all know, taxation is theft. But this actually gets to an interesting question, though, and I think this is one of the beautiful things about the Constitution, even if it manifests itself in kind of a weird way here. Us as libertarians, we talk about some of these things like upholding individual rights to life, liberty, and property, and we have a sort of conception of that and understanding of individual rights and how you shouldn't violate that. Most folks, the average voter, doesn't understand that. The average observer of politics doesn't understand that, but they do understand the kind of simple things that exist particularly in the Bill of Rights. Freedom of speech. Anybody can understand that. You can say what you want to say, and there shouldn't be any legal penalties for it. The right to bear arms, right to due process. Even if what that exactly means may still be a little bit muddled, freedom of religion, etc. Those things are codified in a way that is very concrete and clear and simple, where people can at least understand the basic concept. And if they understand that, then it's much harder for these guys to completely circumvent it. Like they can do their sort of sophistry to justify why the federal government can pass a law, for example, like I was talking about red flag laws, or giving money to states as a way of circumventing the 10th Amendment by incentivizing them to do things like set the drinking age to 21, things of this nature. So they're able to do these things, but it's not quite to the extent of what you see in other countries where this doesn't exist, where these clear limitations aren't stated in this way. And so I think it is, and I think that has a lot to do with why you see churches and stuff are still sort of a protected class, sort of this thing. And for the record, I guess kind of to my same semi-joking comment, not totally joking comment, to saying that we shouldn't tax anybody, is that the treatment that we give to, or at least the idea of religious freedom in the U.S., unfortunately, for so many of the proponents of it, they've latched onto this idea of, again, the omnipotent government that can do whatever it wants, but we have a special exception because what we're doing or what we're thinking here is based on our religious views, which is totally wrong. And it's part of why they have run into trouble so many times, is because that's not a tenable view. If you accept that the government has the right to regulate something or to restrict behavior in some way, they're going to do it to everybody, and you're not going to get a special exception just because you're this, that, or the other thing. But in some cases they're able to, and this is one of them. Charity is another way to funnel money. There's an overabundance of ways, and again, there's certainly an intermingling. I don't forget it, I can't remember who it was that was making the commentary, but somebody had made a commentary sort of retrospectively of how the intermingling of religion and politics over the last century, and I guess sort of lamenting the fact that I guess a lot of churches had gone from, instead of this focus on spirituality, had instead gotten really into politics. And it's interesting for me, and for somebody who, even though I am religious, religion really usually stays out of my, or at least I don't bring my politics into religion. I think they're thoroughly consistent, but I would say that it's not like I go, or put it to you this way, within my church it would be very unconscionable for me to say I'm going to go campaigning there. You would never have a candidate speak, giving a speech within a church service, in any place I've ever been a part of. So to me, it is sort of strange, even though it's very common in America and has been for a lot of mainline churches for that sort of thing to happen, where candidates are doing the rounds at churches. In some ways, it's understandable because of how they have been intertwined with local communities. But again, it is, and I guess maybe it's partly that relationship, which again, one hand sort of washing the other, and giving favoritism. I mean, the same thing that happens with anyone who contributes in a way to a politician's success, whether it's a donor, whether we're talking about lobbyists, or somebody who's preparing a job for them when they come out of office, if they provide favorable conditions to them. Any one of these kind of scenarios that can be. So it's, there's an obvious danger when anyone is getting sort of undue influence in government, and it's problematic. So, but again, it is a question, if people are honest about it, what it is they really want. And obviously, if a church or any sort of private organization wants to get advantages out of government, there's a certain path that they go, and that's what a lot of them do nowadays. I can understand how we got to this point, but the question is really, when we stop and think about it, if we're honest with ourselves, what do we want? Do we want to ensure our freedom, or do we want to just ensure that we get a little bit ahead for the next day by taking a little bit of an advantage? I'm hoping we can sell freedom, and we can do a better job of it than maybe we have in generations past. So that's my hope and my goal. I'm a little past my time for what I had planned for the stream, but we got started a little late, so I'm going to cut it off there, guys. Thank you all for sitting in and chatting with me, and let's hope we can bring this to more people. and spread the word, spread the news, and get a few more people engaged. Thank you guys again for participating. Have a good day.